Hello and welcome to another episode of my sound design tutorial series. Noah the Boy here. Thanks so much for joining in. I always get a kick out of showing you some tips and tricks with the tools that I use. So this month we're going to be picking up where we left off last month, and that's with Izotope Trash 2. Now last month I walked you through the Filter 1, the Trash, and the Filter 2 modules, and this month we're going to be going through the other three, so Convolve, Dynamics, and Delay, and it's through these 6 modules that Trash really comes alive. So without further ado, let's get dirty with Trash. Alright, so let's take a look at the Convolve module. The Convolve module provides convolution modeling of various devices and allows us to take a sound and then submerge that sound in a reverberated environment. If I had to define Convolve, I'd say it's like 4D reverb on steroids. But, we could sit here all day trying to find the right words to apply to this effect. Or I could show you. So let's take a look at the left-hand side here, and you'll see various categories of impulse responses, and the impulse responses are what we apply to then affect the sound. And if you take a look at the top, there's pretty straightforward ones like amp, for example. Then we have things like mech animal or vowels or tone or tail. They really run the gamut between subtle and supremely over the top, and that's what I love about Trash. You can have a really nuanced sound, or you can have a really over the top experimental sound. So to start off, let's listen to this bass sound just to get an idea of what it sounds like without Trash. Alright, so that's the dry bass sound. So now let's go through some of the amp sounds. And you can hear how each one sounds just a little different, and to find the particular impulse response that you want, you might have to do a little digging, but that's one of the fun aspects of Trash, is that exploration stage. So you could go through all of these. Like, these ones sound like you're running this bass through a guitar amp. Then you have other ones that kind of give, tones. Like that, or you have such ones as like the mech animal impulse responses, and these are pretty experimental in nature. Now, with a lot of these impulse responses, they can sound a little over the top and too extreme when at 100%. So I like to drop this mix down and let that original dry sound come through and get a nice blend between this convoluted sound and then the dry original sound. Now, you've messed around with these impulse responses. They're really cool. Maybe you want to try your hand at your own impulse responses, and Trash allows you to do that. So if you click the load button here, you can load any WAV or AIF file, and then Trash will analyze the first part of that sound and use that as an impulse response. So if you have a song that you've made, for example, and you really like the tonal environment of the song, you can apply that to this particular sound. And that's just another layer of exploration, just an awesome rabbit hole. So you've messed around with these impulse responses. Now let's take a look in the center here. So you have these 3 different mic types. Now you have a dynamic mic emulation, a condenser mic emulation, and a ribbon mic emulation. And I like to think of these as almost an A, B, and C version of each of these impulse responses. So if you're trying one of the impulse responses and you're not exactly in love with the particular sound, maybe try a different mic type, and that might do the trick. So for example, with this sound, and oftentimes the differences between these 3 mics are very subtle, but it's just getting that, that extra very detailed layer to the particular sound that can really make or break what you're working on. All right, so moving down here, we have separate, and separate allows you to create a delay either in the left or the right channel to shift the balance of the particular sound. So that's a really handy tool for getting another level of nuance to the depth. And I like to pair the separate with the width. And so the width right now, when it's set at 1, it's stereo. And if you move all the way to the left at 0, it's going to be in mono. And if you move all the way to the right, it's 2 times stereo, so super stereo. And let's take a listen to how that affects the sound. So that it's nice and flat, 2-dimensional. And as we move to the right, it gets more 3-dimensional. And then if you get all the way to the right, it's really, really wide, really stereo wide. And I like using this a lot to get some nice depth, especially to my bass sounds. So these are awesome to mess around with. And then as always, as you're messing around with the width, maybe you want to allow a little more of that dry signal to come through, or maybe not. So messing around with all of these different parameters is super crucial within Convolve, and through that you'll be able to get some really interesting atmospheres to apply to your sound. Okay, so now I've shown you a bit about the Convolve module. Now it's time to dive into the Dynamics module, and for that we're going to be working with this drum break. Because, to be honest, I don't use dynamics as much when I'm just dealing with my bass sounds, because I'm doing a lot of my compression externally, so there's not a lot of reason for me to be compressing within trash here. But with something like a drum loop, for example, trash is awesome for compressing. And just like how I was raving about with the trash module being able to do multi-band distortion, to each different band, you can do multi-band compression and gating. So let's go ahead. And so I have the multi-band turned on here. So if we listen to the original sounds, it's a nice, vinyl drum break. But, maybe we want to compress the low end here. So you can go ahead and adjust the ratio here. So now we're getting a little more, boom in that low end, and then, maybe I want to do a little more compression to this, to the mids here. And you can see with the red line where we're compressing and what we're bringing out. And I guess that's something I didn't mention in the other modules, but up top here, obviously there's a visual representation of what you're doing within trash. So, even though trash, what the name of the game is distortion, you don't want to distort it to the point where, everything's just clipping and there's, no discernible waveform other than a brick. So this is super helpful to, letting us visually see what's going on. So, maybe I want to do a little compression. There we go. So already listening to, here's the dry sound. And here's the drum break ran through Trash's dynamics. So we're getting a little more beefiness in that low end, and that can be really good. So taking a look on the left here, we have our thresholds. So this is for controlling the compressors, thresholds. And then over here, this is for controlling the gates thresholds. And then we have obviously the compressor amount up here, the gate amount up here. You can also click on sidechain and you can send in an external sound, out of a send or a bus within Ableton, or just another auxiliary track, and send it in and trigger the compression or the gate. And that can be super, super helpful. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's just really cool that you can do multi-band compression and gating and this is one of the modules that I'm going to be exploring more, simply because I just don't use it as much, but that doesn't mean that it's not powerful. All right, so last but certainly not least, we have the delay module, and I love using delay on basses, in particular basses where we have a nice tail, and I like to fill in the space here with some cool delay stuff. So let's just play the sound without trash. It's just a nice sustained 808 sound. So turning trash on and turning the delay module on. Let's take a look at it. So once again, let's go from left to right. So I guess starting up here, we have a visual representation of the EQing of the delay. So you can see it rolls off a bit on the lows here, around 20 hertz, and then it starts rolling off, approaching 20,000 hertz up top. And you can EQ this even more to get, a different cutoff or to remove the cutoff altogether. That's really up to you. So that's that. We take a look at the modes here. Just like I explained how you kind of had like an A, B, and C version with those mic emulations with the convolution. You have an A, B, C, D, E, and F version of each of these delays. And they're just different algorithms that work well for different sounds. And as with all of these other modes within Trash, you just have to explore with them and try each one to kind of determine which one will work best for the sound that you're working with. All right, so taking a look at these sliders, they're relatively self-explanatory. We have the delay here, which will be the amount of time before the delay hits again. So in this case right now it's 200 milliseconds, and you go up here to 1,000 milliseconds, you go down here to 1. And if you turn on the host sync, then that sets whether or not the delay is synced. So in this case now it's synced to our tempo, so we're able to get much more rhythmic delays. So I like messing around with that, but sometimes it's cool to have it unsynced. And then we have the feedback amount right here, which is really cool. Automating the delay and feedback I find gets you some really great wild delay trails. Then we have trash, which is the amount that trash is applying to the sound. Which in this case is nothing because we don't have the trash module turned on. Then you have the width amount, so just getting a little more wideness in the sound. And then we have the dry and the wet, which allows us to get a nice blend, once again, between the dry sound and the wet delayed sound. So with this sound in particular, let's start playing it. And I like to turn up the wet. And now let's start messing with that feedback. Alrighty, that's kind of cool. And now playing with that delay amount. So let's do a little automation. Maybe let's start it at 0. Let's have the delay, go up here, come down a little bit. Maybe go down all the way, and then maybe come back up all the way here. And let's also adjust that feedback here, and maybe we'll have the feedback come up slowly in this first part and then really extremely here, and then I'll do a little dip right here. So let's take a listen to that. Let's try for a minute turning on the host sync. All right, so that's just, automating the delay and the feedback. Let's try changing the mode for a second. Okay. Whew, that's a little over the top right now, so I would probably dial it a bit back, but you get the gist. It's just really fun to play around with the delay and the feedback, especially, and kind of turning that host sync on can be really good for getting some nice rhythmic delays. Okay, so now's the fun part. I've shown you a bit of each module and how it works. So let's take that knowledge and start affecting some sounds. So let's start with that moving bass line that we were working with earlier. So I removed the trash that we already had. And so let's listen to the dry sound. So that's what we have right now. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is drag in an audio effect rack. And that's because I want to let these lower frequencies come through nice and cleanly, and then also that they're chained to mono. And so all that we're going to do to trash is to this upper frequency range, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that, and we're going to throw trash right in the middle of here. And you can do a lot of filtering within trash, but I'm just going to use EQ8 to filter before and after. It just kind of comes down to personal preference. Whatever floats your boat, float on. So here we go. So already, probably going to remove a bit of the low mids after trash here. So let's do some multi-band trash to start. So oftentimes when I start with trash, I'm starting with this trash module, and then I'll use the Convolve and like the filters, and I'll add them in just as needed. So I turned on the multiband, so let's start with this second stage. And to be honest, I'm mostly going to work with the second and third stage simply because we're EQing out this low end. So let's just work on the second and third band. So starting here, I'm going to go to the fuzz section. I'm liking the bite on that sound already. So let's start there, and let's go up to the top here. And with these upper or lower bands, a lot of times I like to use these drives because we're just bringing out the sound that's already there. We're not going to do a ton of crazy distortion, so maybe I'll use some smooth overdrive. Okay, that sounded nice. So I'm going to turn on a second stage, and in the second stage, I think I'm going to get a little more creative. So let's maybe go to the retro. I find this iris aliasing to be fun sometimes. You get that kind of throwback bit crush sound. And since it's always set to tension, let's try square for a change. Ooh, that's a bit over the top. So let's go ahead and drag that up here, kind of isolate the frequencies, and let's adjust that mix. Okay. I'm liking how that's sounding. Maybe let's try on the filter. Let's maybe take a little bit out of the high end just to control it a little bit. And let's go back to this first stage. I'm going to draw in a bit just to get a little more nuance. All right, so that's sounding pretty nice. Maybe let's try on the bipolar. Let's do a little stuff to this other side of the waveform. And you can hear how I'm just scanning the frequencies and finding the one that I want to bring out, and then bringing out that particular harmonic. So this is kind of nice. Maybe let's do something to this the stage 2 up top. So let's go ahead. And Oftentimes for these upper frequency bands, I'm just doing it to add a little more crispness up top, or just one more tiny texture to fill out this particular sound. So let's go ahead to the Convolve, because I'm liking how that trash is sounding here. So let's go to the tone. I think that's gonna sound good for this particular bass. So let's go maybe to this acid. That sounds. Let's turn that mix down. Change mic types. Let's up that width. Okay, so right now we're doing the Convolve after the trash, and that's sounding fine, but just how you can get an extremely different sound if you saturate after a reverb or if you saturate before a reverb. It's the same thing with convolving after a trash or convolving before. So if you click this graph button, you can change the signal flow. And this is how it's normally set up. And so we can go ahead and move that convolve right in front of the trash. Now let's take a listen to how it sounds. Versus. So this way we're getting this kind of blown out warmth that we're doing the convolve, and then we're distorting it with trash after the convolve. That can be really, really fun. So I'm going to pop open this graph tab again. So you see how we have the filter 1, that's in this case convolve, and then trash, and then filter 2. If you want to do parallel processing with the filters, you can drag them on top of each other. And so that way you can do 2 different filters that are working on the sound at the same time. And that could be cool for just getting one more layer of movement. So in that case, let's go to the filter now. And I'm just going to do a really simple LFO. Maybe a screaming peak. Let's lower it a little bit. And then I'm going to hit on the sync. And that's just one more layer of movement within this particular sound. And let's go to the filter here. And, since we were doing a peak over there, maybe let's do, a saturated low pass or something. And once again, let's do an LFO. You can be doing envelopes here, or you can just do simple, just filtering. But I'm using this right now to get just a little more movement within the sound. So let's turn on the sync again. I enjoy that because you can get these nice rhythms. Okay. We could be messing around with this even more. Maybe I do another LFO. That's maybe just a shelf. And maybe let's leave this one on syncs. Actually, let's try to do a high pass here. Okay, I'm not sure how I feel about that, so I'm going to hit reset. And let's just stick to an LFO in the middle here, doing another screaming peak. Maybe let's have this screaming peak LFOing lower here. I'm liking how that's sounding. We're getting some really cool movement here. So let's maybe take a look at the dynamics. I don't think I really want to do any compression to it right now. Let's go to the delay. Maybe let's add just a little bit of delay here. And once again, let's turn that host sync on. Yeah. All right. So let's once again, let's hear this sound without trash. And now with the trash that we did. Okay, so I was gonna end the tutorial there, but wouldn't it be more fun to use trash on one more bass sound? So remember that sustained 808 bass from early in the tutorial? Well, I took that, applied some parallel processing, so we're letting the lower frequencies go through nice and clean, and I applied trash to this upper frequency range, and so here's the dry version, and here's the trash version. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a bit of what I did. So first off, I did some filtering. So we did an LFO of a peak, a screaming peak. So we get some interesting movement, and I chose the rate to be nice and slow. And then we went in trash here, and I did 2 stages. I didn't do multiband, but I did the garage fuzz, and then I changed the algorithm from tension to square. So I got this nice, heavy, thick sound. And then went ahead and did a second stage of acid fuzz. And from there, I went to filter, and I have just a bit of a low pass going on because the sound was a bit over the top. So I'm just using this to filter out those really intense upper frequencies. Then I went into Convolve here, and I chose the choke impulse response, and then I went ahead and boosted this width, so I got 2 times stereo. I turned down the mix slightly, but then what I did was, like I said earlier, I moved the Convolve in front of the trash, because if you hear this with the Convolve after the trash, it still sounds really cool. In all honesty, I might use that as like a second version of this bass. But I went ahead and moved the Convolve in front of the trash, and you get this just nice fullness and warmth. And that's basically it. So I didn't do a whole lot. I only spent about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 minutes on this bass. So with, spending 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour on this bass, who knows where it could go. So thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful. I'm really excited for what kind of basses you're going to discover and create in your own music. I feel like I've only scratched the surface with trash, and it's just such a limitless well of inspiration and creation. So as always, let me know what topics you'd like to see me cover next. This is Noah the Boy. I hope you have a fantastic day, and keep on making those beats.